Welcome to the Bad Tutors Podcast. If you're here for the newest up-to-date and accurate information about the nerdy topics that are near and dear to your heart, well, let me tell you, you ended up in the wrong place. Here, we are all about hot takes and grandiose displays of misinformation. So, stick along for the ride and you might just blow a blood vessel or two. Now you might be wondering, Tyler, Ian, what the fuck? Where have you guys been? There should have been an episode already. And let me tell you, technology hates me recently, and this is the third pass at this episode, meaning that it's going to be a quicker version of the topic at hand, and I'm recording on my own, as Tyler is already very aware of this information, and I don't need to trouble him with it again. But you all need to know it, because sticking to our normal flow, I have not remained on evil mega corporations. We had a good couple jokes about it in the first recording, but we are actually going to be talking about a game that I've fallen out of a bit at this point, but at time of recording, I was playing through real hard for the second or third time. And that game is Salt and Sanctuary. A game that I hear a lot of people talking about, like Souls-likes. Obviously, I'm a Souls-like enjoyer, but it's not a very descriptive term really when it comes down to it, because people kind of just use it to describe any game with boss combat and a dodge roll that has varying speeds. And that's very reductive of a lot of games to describe them that way. Like, you hear people talking about Hollow Knight being a Souls-like, or something like that, where it's so much more than that. It'd be like if we referred to games as like a combination of Metroid and Castlevania, and thank God we have not entered into that dark reality just yet. But that being said, I would unfortunately go back on everything I've just described to call Salt and Sanctuary 2D Dark Souls. And it is 2D Dark Souls to a T. It is more of the storytelling style of Dark Souls, the kind of atmosphere and ambiance that a lot of the Dark Souls games capture. It just feels a lot more inspired by Dark Souls than maybe some of the other games are, because of how it presents itself and the types of items and magics and things and how we take in the lore of the game. It feels very Souls-like. The map connects in very satisfying ways that you don't see in other games like this necessarily. So, friends, let's kick into the background and world building to a game that not many people realistically know about, except probably a rather high percentage of our audience, because I won't shut the fuck up about it. But I finally took the time to actually learn about it. So, to start off, your character is Saltborn. This means that in the theming of the world, the salt that you get as a drop from enemies when you kill them is your equivalent of souls in the Dark Souls series, Blood Echoes, in Bloodborne, so on and so forth. This, in a lore sense, means that everything comes from the sea. You were born of the salt, you will die of salt, and your salt will be returned to the sea. This game then takes place on the Nameless Island. There is a lot to kind of break up and talk about with the Nameless Island, as one could guess for a Souls-like game, but for the purposes of what I need to talk about today, the easiest way to think about the Nameless Island is that it is limbo. If one is to die and go here, they're in a state of limbo, as opposed to a heaven or hell that may or may not exist in this world. The people that go to the Nameless Island and are stuck in this limbo are specifically those people as well who have died at sea. They are taken by the Nameless King, who rules the Nameless Island. Kind of makes sense and lines up that way. What he does to make this limbo, to make this place, is he takes the memories of those people who have died at sea, and he rips them from their head and kind of extrapolates them and interprets them in his own way and puts them into the Nameless Island, or the Nameless Isle. I go back and forth a lot in the phrasing of it. This leads to certain areas like the Hall of Red Cages and various other endgame areas being physically present within the game of Salt and Sanctuary, while none of it is technically part of the real world of the lore. Discussion that Tyler and I had throughout this is that while we talk about the game, we have to acknowledge that while it is canonical in the lore, the stories and world building we will be talking about will basically be 0% of the game, other than a couple bosses here and there. So before we get into the beginnings of magic and gods and the beginnings of the world, one little fun piece of information that I have is that the cycle of rebirth and arriving on the Nameless Island is kind of analogous for a new character spawning every time, so you can say that every single one of your characters is canon within the world. This being said, we've all seen memes of different Dark Souls notes, dog butthole, rump ahead, things like that. Salt and Sanctuary has this too for the multiplayer system. They are called journey bottles within the game. It is kind of a message in a bottle type of vibe. And the funniest part of the whole game, when you're kind of putting it all together, is that journey bottles are canon, realistically, in the world of Salt and Sanctuary. Oh, and one more thing that I forgot to mention before I continue on talking about this is where I am getting all of this information. Similar to Bloodborne, when we talked about that, I enjoy these and I want to do as much of my own research as I can, but I'm simply one man, and the full book that I was looking at was known as the Drown Tome. This is like an item within the game and various other things, but a very nice person on Reddit named Asuko13, it has the Drown Tome, a full write-up in the similar style, and he references it himself to the Pale Hunt, which was the lore breakdown from all of the in-game items, little notes and things that you can find throughout Bloodborne. He went through, or they went through, and did it for Salt and Sanctuary, so I will have some of my own interpretations of the lore here, as well as some of his. Most of it seems to just be like pretty straightforward fact within the world, and he definitely calls out when they are talking about something that there is their own theory. I will be doing the same. But without further ado, I'm going to get into it here. And the first thing that I want to talk about is Krakens. These are ancient demons within the world of Salt and Sanctuary, and they are the only thing that I have seen reference to that can traverse the basically plane shift between the Nameless Island, or that limbo state, and the real world. They can exist in both of them either at the same time, or they can go back and forth when they want to. They're also shapeshifters to help lure their victims into danger. We can see this within the game with the false jester, one of the bosses within the game, who takes on the guise of, believe it or not, the jester, who gives a very key upgrade within the game, but within the lore is known to be very helpful and help those in need. So obviously this very ancient demon realized that and said, "Oh, I can take advantage of that, and people will come to me and think that I'll help them when actually he kills them." Another fun one is their mimics, or mimcues, within the game, but they are certainly the standard chest mimic, but they turn into like cool octopus guys instead of the nightmare abomination that they are in Dark Souls, which is kind of cool. They are a race of creatures that evolved mostly in the sea after being pushed out by a number of hunters. Obviously, I've said they're very ancient and very powerful, but eventually when people get strong enough, they don't want to just die all the time. So they pushed them out and had to figure out how to come back and hunt a little bit better. These creatures, it's not 100% clear. It does not seem this way, but they could also be gods or like a subset or stepping stone to the ascension to godhood. Based on just how powerful they are, there seems to be a lot of through ties to like more power and more recognition is closer to ascension and closer to godhood. The possible interpretation with the Nameless King being that if enough people have their memories put together and think that the Nameless Island is almost real enough, and the Nameless King therefore is as well, he could possibly ascend to godhood. There's a couple theories around that I can get into at a later time when Tyler's back with us. The last thing to talk about with the Krakens is that there are 6 major ones. We have the Unspeakable Deep, the tutorial boss of the game, the False Jester, the Kraken Cyclops, the Kraken Worm, and the Kraken Dragon Scores. Also known as the Lord of Storms and the King of the Kraken as well. Or could possibly be the King of the Kraken, my apologies. He has the power to, like, summon these massive storms and sink ships, and therefore is probably a very big source of things that get people and souls to the Nameless Island, which to some degree ties into the theory, of course, that the Nameless God and the Kraken could either be working together, or if that is too bold of a word, they are at least benefiting off of each other. The next thing to talk about is the gods. We've talked about kind of a, not predecessor to them, but a slightly lowered version of them. One of the biggest things, of course, after that is the gods themselves. There is a number of different gods that they get called on in different ways, as creeds are a very integral point to Sultan Sanctuary as a gameplay, but also, of course, to the world. Creeds are religions within the world. So, to go quickly through the old pantheon of gods, we have Daedal, the goddess of the sky, Azradek, the god of bloodletting, Oema, the god of the harvest, Pyrabella, the goddess of fertility, Numen, the god of dark things, Gruul, the god of forest creatures, Emirios, the god of the sea, Ellen Esteria, the goddess of luck, Oporos, god of health, Mirlik, god of the dream world, Tartaglia, the goddess of the dead world, and Devara, the goddess of light. I just listed a whole bunch of things, and one of them is really funny to me, of dark things. I think that is so nondescript compared to all of them that it could mean just anything that is in the dark or is made of the shadows. I don't know what it means. he doesn't come up too much, so it's okay. The two that are important to pay attention to here, or at least the most important to pay attention to, are Azradek, the god of bloodletting, and Devara, the goddess of light. The reason that those two are the most important is because they both have creeds centered directly around them. We will hop a little bit more into the creeds in a bit, as I want to call out the magic system first, but those are the kind of founding members, of course, of the world and how everything got set up. These are the original people that were worshipped and the things that have been there for the longest period of time. After that, let us talk about magic. This comes from the Tree of Life. It is still actually pretty new within the world, at least to the world of mortals. So therefore, it is pretty often blamed for things when just anything goes wrong at all. There are two kinds of magic within the world. There are spells, which mechanically within the game require a focus, such as a wand or a staff. They are, for that reason, kind of easier magics to cast and do a little bit less, as you don't need to be the focus yourself. You can channel it through something else, where when you get to incantations, they require only spoken words, so it is a higher level of skill that you have to be able to use incantations. There are obviously mechanically spells and incantations at the same level within the game, but in a lore sense, that's how it would work. And I'm mostly going to be talking within a lore sense for most of this as well, of course. Now, the next thing that you might ask yourself is, okay, two kinds of magic, seems pretty standard. Where does it come from? Because that's where a lot of magic systems become more interesting. And I know that I said the Tree of Life as well, but more specifically, because everything kind of comes from the Tree of Life, we get the Weave of Fire and Sky. That is the much more specific kind of magic that we have. There are only a couple kinds. There are 4 total, I'm going to call it, flavors of magic. We have, of course, Fire and Sky, which can be pretty directly put to fire and lightning. And it's interesting because mechanically in the game, when you cast either a fire or lightning spell, you get a bar up at the top of your screen, and if it goes one way too far, if it maxes out one side of the bar, you start to take damage. So if you cast too many lightning spells, eventually you start taking damage. You have to cast fire spells to then balance it out, and you're actually keeping the weave balanced. You're weaving in between it, keeping everything balanced. It's lore-wise very interesting. It's mechanically eliminated by one ring that makes it so you just don't have to pay attention to it at all, and it's absolutely not an issue. But I think it's a pretty cool kind of thing to draw from for a magic system. And as well, the actual skill tree within the game takes the shape of the Tree of Life to kind of really link everything together. The next magic, or the next 2 magics, are actually illegal within the lore of the world. The first one certainly makes the most sense because it is salt alchemancy. Now, salt alchemancy is basically Salt and Sanctuary necromancy. If everything in the world comes from salt and is made of salt, fucking with the salt that makes up the things, big frowned upon. They do not like it. On the mainland, where all the people live, they are not a fan of it. It is viewed as changing the natural course of life and death. And this can be like actual just necromancy, like bring the dead back to life as like zombie guys. It can also be the thing that we kind of see a little more commonly, or is a bigger part of the game, I can say at least, is it is still done in the Salt Alchemancry by two of the bosses who we're going to get into later. But they take the salt of beans and mix it with that of others, creating these unholy ass abominations that are terrifying. And that leads us into the final kind of magic. Excuse me. Which is blood magic. And I mentioned that the two gods that we need to remember are Devara and Azradak. And not only does Azradak have a creed based around him, he also has a whole kind of magic. Because I said that he was the god of bloodletting, he has blood magic associated with him. At some point, he became pretty evil and said, actually, you know what? The Weave of Fire and Sky is cringe. I hate this shit. Fuck this shit. I want my own kind of magic, and blood magic was created. This comes directly from the blood of a person. You take a little bit of damage every time you use blood spells, but they're very powerful, and they have no elemental imbalance. So it completely bypasses the Weave of Fire and Sky, and just damages things, and is it's blood magic. You're hurting things physically with your blood, or messing with their blood to hurt them. And outside of magic, we also do have prayer. I'm talking a lot about gods. I'm talking about creeds. Obviously, there are prayers within the game in your same kind of magic and holy magic within Dark Souls. And prayers, while magic has like what I think is some pretty like interesting and kind of more unique themes and mechanics within this world of Souls-likes, prayers are prayers, and they do cleric shit. They heal you, summon spiritual weapons, bless your weapon, and have like one damaging, I think genuinely 2 damaging spells. It is stock-ass cleric shit, and that's fine, but that's very much all it is. The final thing that I want to talk about for today, before Tyler and I get into the actual events of the world and the kind of fun stories that take place within it, are the creeds. Creeds, mechanically, again, within the game, is what you use to rest, is the worst way I could have possibly described it. Every bonfire within Sultan Sanctuary is a sanctuary. A sanctuary is a place to worship the gods. And how does one worship the gods? Through their creed. Every creed has an icon, which is a actual like item within the game that you place on a pedestal in every sanctuary that becomes your bonfire. You can level up there. You can get some hirelings to like in the way of a shopkeeper, a fast travel point, someone to improve your weapons, that kind of thing. It's your little home base in every location in the game. Every area has at least one sanctuary. Your creed is selected at the start of the game. There are a couple that you can pick just on off rip. There's a guy that talks to you that we will talk about soon that just says, which god do you worship? You pick which one you want. Mechanically, you can get a couple different items a little earlier within the game. It depends on play style and what you're going for certain things, but for the first couple playthroughs, when you're just playing it blind, you're going to notice very little difference, if you notice a difference at all. And some of them you still have to discover within the world. I am going to go through all of them now. And the first 2 notes about them are that all except for the iron ones worship 1 or more gods, and all except for the iron ones in the 3 worship 1 or more old gods, specifically. So we're going to start off with the stone roots, or the wood wraiths. This is kind of your analogous for your paganistic religions within the world. They're the old religion that have gotten replaced by newer creeds. They view gods as more elemental or spiritual, and like trees being the genuine incarnations of gods and these spirits that give them power. They are very skilled with alchemy and poisons. When we first encounter them in the game, they have an alchemist sitting there ready to talk to you and say, hey, actually join our creed. We're pretty cool. And they're so cool that they actually made one of the later bosses in the game that stench most foul because they're fucking dumb. But they are so good at alchemy as well, partially that maybe not because of, but they have access to some of the purest form of healing. All of the other creeds that I'm going to go into use basically a derivative of this, or some kind of crossbreed of it with something else, something mixed in, diluting it, and getting to the same effect. And that is the Candian red grass. This is your Estus flask for the game. You get, or all of them have a variation of it that is the equivalent of your Estus flask. You level up your loyalty to your creed, and you can get more and more, as well as getting them through the level up system too. Now, they breed this grass with other plants to give, for instance, your mana or stamina reviving drink as well, and some other poisons that you can apply to your weapons. Next is Devara's Light. This is one of the bigger ones, one of the, within the world at least. Devara was considered to be the mother of all gods. The whole list of gods that I read through, when I said only 12 mattered, is because all of them kind of combined into one under Devara's Light. This was not one to eliminate the other gods, but Devara was viewed as the biggest and most prominent, so she kind of took over while worship was still performed for the others, of course. Their place of worship was the Dome of the Forgotten, which is once the Dome of Light, but we're going to talk about why it is no longer the Dome of Light. It was watched over by Devara's servants, which were mostly women, and they would gather and create great inventions. Not only weapons of war and offense, but defensive and things to improve society. The members were known as the Choir, and they were the highest ranking ladies and craftswomen within the worship of Devara. And the true priest of light, the true priest of light and voice of her voice, was the head of this congregation. They will soon be known as the Untouched Inquisitor. They had a realization that the Dome of Light was sinful and it needed to be cleansed. And the way that it needed to be cleansed is by sacrificing 3 lambs. And believe it or not, there weren't no sheep anywhere when we're talking about lambs, because the first lamb was the entire congregation of the Dome of Light. The second lamb was Linnea, the Lady of Light, who was kind of a second in command to the true priest of light and voice of her voice. And the third lamb was Kanoa, the Hippogriff, who was the pet of the Lady of Light, and we can now find in the game as the third lamb boss. We unfortunately do not get to know her name within just the game itself. You gotta go look for it on your own through notes and lore. Next, we're gonna move on to the 3. And this is not only the one that was worshipped the most by humans, but it is kind of the default one when you first start the game. The man that you talk to will say, do you keep the three? This is, do you keep the creed of the three? And these are the only gods that we know of that came directly from man. And this is through being rich and powerful and super nepotistic, obviously. It was made up of the king, King Enrico the Austere, the knight, Sir Amar the Proper, and simply the judge, of whose name I do not believe we know. They ruled with a very iron fist once they got into power after kind of unifying the world under the Great Unification Decree, which we will get into a little bit later on when we talk about the world. They were able to kill everyone else that wasn't worshipping the three, and the few creeds that remained were very hidden away, and they became the biggest group to be worshipped and ascended to godhood themselves. And they use the crim flower instead of red grass. Next we have the Iron Ones. Their whole stance is that God is actually super cringe and we don't want to deal with them anymore. So they view humanity and the will of humans as stronger within the world, which is kind of crazy because clearly gods are super real within the world. It kind of goes back to the joke that we always have that not believing in a god, or believing that the gods are not real within Pathfinder or 5th edition, because they so clearly are. They're very clearly a real entity, and the fact that they pretend that they kind of aren't, or not that they aren't real, but that they don't matter as much, is wild to me. And also, their healing item is bread. They bake their healing herbs into bread, and that's kind of fun. I think it's at least kind of interesting. And that's the Iron Ones. They kind of don't have a lot because they don't have a lot of gods that they're worshiping or anything like that. Next is the House of Splendor, who worship Giabiel, the god of wine, also known as the Fool, and Axiagal, the god of visions, also known as the Prophet. The kind of fun little quirky thing about these guys is that all of them have gray rot, which is the plague, and it spreads really fast. It's theorized possibly that it came from the leprous bandits, which are enemies within the game and within the real world of the game, of course, as well. And they all hide their faces behind solid gold masks, saying that the flesh is failing, but gold is forever. Now, people say that being drunk gets you closer to the warp. And by the warp, I mean the weave of fire and sky. And by they, I mean their god, the Fool. The god of wine says, get really drunk, and you will be closer to magic. And they become stronger with the magic and become stronger overall as they drink their healing item, which is wine. And also, because it's wine, it fucking poisons you. And if you drink too much of it, you mechanically become poisoned and start taking damage from it. But it's one of the better healing and damaging creeds within the game. So it's a trade-off of being able to balance how much poison you are taking into you while still maintaining benefit. Just like real alcoholism. It's so fun. We love to escape reality on this podcast. The last two here, starting with the Keepers of Fire and Sky. As you can tell, the Keepers of Fire and Sky are tied inherently to the Weave of Fire and Sky. These are worshippers more of magic, but they view magic in the way of godhood to an extent. It's somewhat similar to the Stone Roots, but not identical. They still kind of have that. In fact, they had a little split with the blood brows, and they wanted to keep gods as well as worshiping this magic. And that is when the weave was possibly kind of like discovered and founded within the mortal world, like connecting godhood and the magic within the world of mortal people. One of the bosses, Merdelia Mal, could be their god, big air quotes, which is the Drowned Home's author's speculation. She is she is the only boss in the game to not drop any salt, which, as we said, is like your equivalent of souls. So it's going to be a somewhat logical leap to say that enemy that does not drop salt could be something more than mortal in that case. The next thing to talk about here is the process of becoming a mage. This here is, of course, lifelong. You go to the Citadel, which is where you train for 17 years to become an acolyte of the Keepers of Fire and Sky, at which point you are like sworn to silence and secrecy about your practice and study. And as in a lot of other things, being a mage in this world is just being a magic nerd. You just read a lot of books and go through all of that. But the funny thing to me about them is that they're still clerics of the mages, but because they need to cope, seethe, and fucking mold, they just kind of pretend that instead of gods being real, they're just praying to like a celestial elemental, because when your whole thing is practicing casting fireballs and lightning storms, you need to be able to heal, but it's just very funny to me that they're like, well, it's not God, it's not any of the gods. There's just someone else out there that it's just an elemental. Don't worry about or think about it. And then finally, the last thing that we're going to go through before I bring Tyler back on to the next episode, and we talk about the full lore of the world and some of the stories here, and not just the setup of it, is the Order of the Betrayer. Now, again, I've mentioned it a few times. This is the worship of Azradak. We've talked about his magic. We've talked about him as a god. Now we talk about him with his creed. He is now known as the Betrayer, Azradak the Betrayer, instead of Azradak, the god of bloodletting. And he fucking hates Devara. He wants to kill her. He wants to kill her real bad. He's not a big fan of her, and he wants her dead. I'm guessing because she became the kind of de facto leader, and the Betrayer seemed like someone that maybe wanted to be in charge in his own right. All of his followers use blood magic, of course, which is one of the strongest in the game, not only as a type of magic, but they get an item that eliminates all defenses of the enemy that you hit with it, which is crazy strong, not only in PvP, but throughout the actual game itself. There is a theory that Azradak could be the nameless god. At my point of research, I do not believe this to be true. I could change my mind the next time I talk about it, though. Who's to say? We'll have to come back and find out. And I know this episode has certainly been a little scrambled and hopefully coherent enough. As I said, this is not the first pass at it, so we just needed to get this one out after a bunch of technical difficulties. We hope you have a great rest of your week, weekend, day, whenever you happen to be listening to this episode. We hope that this one tickles your fancy and that you think that Salt and Sanctuary is interesting too. We hope that you go out and buy the game. It's always very cheap, even when it's full price. It's very worth the investment if you like a Souls-like, and I'm going to be talking about it more, whether or not you like it and whether or not Tyler likes it, because I think it's very fun to dive into deep, obscure lores that are very difficult to get into with hopefully as niche a community as possible. But until next time, I've been Ian, and Tyler is also here with us in spirit, and he's always been Tyler. And next time when we come back, it's actually going to be on a Friday. We're going to be flipping up our schedule a bit here to align more with adult life, but expect us in 2 weeks on a Friday, and we will talk to you soon.